Usually when we talk about getting a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of precision, you know.
Oh, absolutely. Like, you want it to be black and white.
Right. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged little white line on the bone, and the doctor just points right to the screen. It's totally binary.
Yeah, the bone is either broken or it's intact. The treatment is standard. We crave that level of visibility.
Exactly. We want to categorize the damage so we can just apply the right splint and move on. But the moment you step away from the human body and try to diagnose the structural integrity of a society,
Oh man, that x-ray machine just shatters.
it really does. You're left looking at this diagnostic landscape that is just completely opaque. Like, everyone agrees the patient Western civilization, in this case, is showing severe symptoms.
Right, but the diagnoses of what's actually causing the fever are just violently opposed to one another.
The battle lines are drawn over the fundamental nature of the disease itself. And today we are wading into some of the most turbulent and intellectually hostile waters we've ever navigated on this deep dive.
Yeah, this one is definitely heavy.
We are taking a meticulous look at a highly charged new ebook. It's titled Logic Over Leftism: Escaping the Narcissistic Violence of the Female-Coded Ideologues by an author named Conrad Riker.
Just the title alone tells you exactly where this is going.
Oh, the thesis is explosive. Riker basically argues that Western institutions haven't just drifted politically, but they've been entirely captured and inverted by this biologically unnatural, emotion-driven ideology.
But before we unpack the actual architecture of his argument, we
Yeah.
really need to set some parameters for you guys listening.
Yes.
This text is written very specifically for a certain demographic. It's targeting men's rights activists and, the red-pilled manosphere audience. It makes some really unapologetic, sweeping claims about gender, biology, and authority.
So our mission today is strict impartiality. We are just acting as your analytical guides through this text.
Yeah.
We're not taking sides, we're not endorsing Riker's viewpoints, and we aren't condemning them either.
Right, we're just here to disassemble the intellectual engine he built, lay all the parts out on the table, and see how they connect.
Exactly. We want to understand the why and the how behind his worldview. And hey, if you want to examine the source material directly for yourself, you should really check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the book.
Yeah, we always encourage you to do your own reading and form your own conclusions.
And take a quick second right now to like and subscribe to the show so you never miss these in-depth analyses. So, where do we even begin with the sheer scale of Riker's critique?
Well, to really get it, we have to bypass all his modern political grievances and go straight to the epistemological bedrock he lays down in the opening chapters.
Right, he goes way back.
Yeah, he doesn't start with modern politics at all. He starts with ancient Greece. He frames this entire modern cultural conflict as a clash between classical, unyielding logic and modern subjective emotional sentiment.
He anchors his whole worldview to Aristotle, right? Specifically the organon.
Exactly. The organon and the absolute law of non-contradiction. That mathematical axiom, the A is A. A thing cannot be both itself and its opposite at the exact same time.
Right, it's just fundamental logic. And Riker argues that the entirety of Western civilization, like every bridge built, every law codified, was forged using the syllogism.
The syllogism being that classical form of deductive reasoning, like if all mammals are warm-blooded and a dog is a mammal, then a dog has to be warm-blooded.
The conclusion is inescapable.
Yeah, and his crucial assertion here is that this form of logic is totally independent of human emotion. The mathematical truth of a syllogism really doesn't care if the conclusion offends you or scares you.
Or invalidates your personal identity. It just is what it is.
Exactly. And he maps this relentless structural deduction directly onto traditional masculinity.
Right, he argues that men are biologically and evolutionarily hardwired to systemize because, their survival depended on interacting with objective physical reality.
Yeah, his point is you can't build a functioning Roman aqueduct based on how the water makes you feel. You have to understand the brutal, unforgiving physics of gravity and masonry.
So he contrasts this Aristotelian baseline with modern leftism, which he aggressively labels and this is a key phrase, female-coded metaphysic.
That phrase is literally the skeleton key to his entire book.
It really is. He argues leftism has abandoned objective physical laws. Instead, they treat reality as this fluid, highly malleable social construct.
Right. In a female-coded metaphysic, your subjective emotional states are somehow elevated to the level of objective truth.
So if a collective group just feels a certain narrative is true, the ideology demands that society validates and enforces that feeling as literal reality.
And Riker claims this epistemological shift turns people into what he calls ideologically possessed NPC zombies.
NPC zombies, wow.
Yeah, he says they just operate on these pre-programmed emotional scripts, chanting slogans, while completely ignoring actual biological realities.
And the main biological reality he says they ignore is what he calls the egalitarian fallacy. Riker observes that modern institutions just assume any unequal outcome, like in corporate boardrooms or STEM fields, is definitive proof of systemic bias.
Or oppressive patriarchal design, yeah. He completely rejects that premise. He argues that demanding absolute behavioral or statistical parity between men and women is just a biological absurdity.
Because humans are a sexually dimorphic species, right?
Exactly. We see sexual dimorphism in nature constantly. The size difference between a male and female silverback gorilla or, a peacock versus a peahen.
But he says it goes beyond just bone density or upper body strength. He says it's hardwired into our psychological and neurobiological architecture.
And to back this up, he points away from Aristotle and looks at modern empirical research. Specifically, he leans really heavily on a landmark study from the year 2000 out of Cambridge University.
Oh, Professor Simon Baron-Cohen's study.
That's the one. And the methodology of that study is exactly why Riker uses it as the anchor for his argument.
Right, because usually the cultural debate is all about socialization. The idea that boys are given trucks and girls are given dolls, and society just constructs gender roles from a blank slate.
But Baron-Cohen's team looked at infants who were less than 24 hours old.
Wow. Literally day-old neonates.
Yeah, neonates with absolutely zero cultural conditioning, no media, no toys, no parental reinforcement. The researchers gave them two visual stimuli, a mechanical mobile and a human face.
And the results are pretty stark, right?
Extremely. On the very first day of life, neonatal males overwhelmingly fixated on the mechanical objects. They showed this raw, primal drive to systemize moving parts.
While the neonatal females spent significantly more time looking at the human faces.
Exactly, demonstrating an innate biological prioritization of empathy and social connection over mechanical systems.
So Riker just uses this data point as a sledgehammer against the blank slate theory. He declares that biology is the sovereign architect here and sociological conditioning is just a superficial paint job.
That's his claim, yeah.
But wait, there's a massive conceptual hole here that we have to examine.
Let's hear it.
Riker builds this absolute hardwired binary. Men are systemizers, women are empathizers, but anyone observing the real world can see highly empathetic men who are great nurses and highly systemizing women who are brilliant engineers.
Sure, outliers exist everywhere.
Right. So if his biological determinism is so unyielding, how does his framework account for that massive volume of demographic exceptions?
Well, Riker addresses this by operating strictly within macro-level evolutionary averages. He acknowledges that individual variance exists, but he insists that massive civilizational structures have to be built on the broad, predictable behavioral bell curves of the sexes.
Not the outliers.
Right. And more importantly, he resolves this tension between base biology and civilized behavior by bringing in the Enlightenment philosopher David Hume.
Oh, Hume's famous is-ought problem.
Exactly. The philosophical trap of assuming that just because something is a certain way in nature, that automatically means it ought to be that way in a moral society.
So Riker avoids the naturalistic fallacy entirely.
He does. Leftist critics often assume biological determinists think base human nature is good and should just run wild. But Riker argues the exact opposite.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he posits that civilization itself is this artificial, deeply uncomfortable construct that was designed specifically to repress our animalistic instincts.
Fascinating. And he uses the concept of female hypergamy to illustrate that repression, right?
Yes, he defines hypergamy as the primal evolutionary urge to secure a mate with the highest possible status, resources, and genetic fitness.
And Riker says that in a state of nature, unchecked hypergamy leads to this brutal competition among males. A tiny fraction of apex men hoard all the reproductive access,
leaving a massive underclass of violent, disenfranchised males, which is highly destabilizing.
So how does the patriarchy fix that, according to him?
He argues that the traditional patriarchal structure, specifically lifelong monogamous marriage, wasn't a system of oppression. He calls it a supreme sociological technology.
A technology to artificially suppress hypergamy.
Yes, and male reproductive aggression at the same time. By making sure average men had access to family formation, the patriarchy essentially funneled all that male kinetic energy away from violent tribal warfare.
and channeled it into the monotonous labor of building infrastructure, farming, and maintaining civic order.
Exactly. So if those specific biologically male traits, the aggressive systemizing, the structural logic, the repression of base urges, were the tools that built the West.
What happens when the institutions governing that civilization change their operating system?
Well, that's exactly what he explores next. He traces the lineage of the patriarchal inheritance to show what's currently being dismantled.
He argues our modern reality is built on three historical forces, right?
Yeah, Athens gave us formal logic and the adversarial pursuit of truth. Rome gave us the architecture of codified law and bureaucratic governance.
Because vast civilizations need strict hierarchy so they don't fracture.
Right. And finally, the Enlightenment injected the scientific method, that empirical rigor from guys like Francis Bacon and Isaac Newton.
Those are the load-bearing pillars of his worldview. But Riker says that over the last few decades, a bureaucratic matrix has aggressively hijacked those pillars.
And he defines this matrix as human resources departments, university administrations, and corporate diversity mandates.
He claims their explicit function is to punish masculine excellence.
Yes. He says they pathologize risk-taking, unilateral action, and merit-based hierarchies. And in their place, they reward what he calls female-coded mediocrity.
Like prioritizing emotional consensus over actual correct outcomes, and demanding flattened hierarchies where nobody's feelings get hurt by a lack of competence.
I mean, the mechanism he describes is essentially a hostile corporate takeover.
Yeah, let me throw an analogy out there for this. Imagine a ruthless investment firm buys a company that makes high-end precision jet engines.
Okay, I follow.
The new board doesn't actually care about aviation physics. They just bought it to liquidate assets, rewrite the mission statement to focus on carbon neutrality, and replace the structural engineers with community outreach managers.
Right, the company still exists on paper, but
But the second you try to fly a plane with their new engines, the whole system catastrophically fails, because the pursuit of engineering truth was replaced by the pursuit of ideological compliance.
that analogy maps perfectly onto Riker's concept of the female entryism schema.
Right? He argues that when feminist movements demand entry into male-exclusive spaces, it's almost never because they genuinely want to participate in the arduous function of that space.
He claims the real motivation is purely power. The Matrix views the mere existence of a functioning male space one generating competence without female oversight as an intolerable threat.
It has to be neutralized. And he breaks this entryism schema into 4 stages.
Stage 1 is infiltration. Activists demand access using the sanitized rhetoric of abstract egalitarianism. They frame the male space as an unjust monopoly on power.
Then stage 2 is the cultural pivot. The instant entry is achieved, the internal culture has to alter itself to accommodate female-coded sensitivities.
The rough, unfiltered adversarial male bonding is abruptly replaced by performative civility and speech policing.
Which leads to stage 3, where they alter the core function and metrics of the institution. Objective excellence is abandoned because it produces unequal outcomes.
Right, the new primary metric just becomes maintaining emotional safety and inclusive representation.
And finally, stage 4, total collapse. The competent men who built the institution abandon it, leaving a hollow bureaucratic husk. And then the activists just move on to the next target.
Riker uses the Boy Scouts of America as his definitive case study for this. Founded in 1910, it was explicitly engineered to instill self-reliance and rugged masculinity.
He even compares the original Boy Scouts to the ancient Spartan Gauche, right?
He does, a dangerous, boundary-testing environment designed to physically prepare boys to be protectors. But Riker argues a gynocentric bureaucracy cannot tolerate a space that teaches boys to be dangerous and competent outside of their control.
So through decades of legal attrition, they forced the organization to admit girls and restructure its curriculum.
And he asserts that the instant that female entryism was mandated, the core purpose of the Boy Scouts was nullified. Boys' natural kinetic energy was suddenly pathologized as toxic.
And it was reduced to just a generic, risk-averse youth club. But this pathologizing of male traits isn't just happening in youth clubs. Riker says it's conquered academia too.
Oh, absolutely. To prove the death of Aristotelian logic in universities, he brings up the grievance studies hoax from 2017 and 2018.
I remember this. It's a stunning empirical data point. 3 academics, James Lindsay, Peter Boghossian, and Helen Pluckrose, set out to expose the structural rot in academic journals.
Specifically in sociology, gender studies, and critical theory. And they didn't just write bad papers, they meticulously engineered completely fabricated, mathematically absurd studies.
But they used the exact vocabulary of the bureaucratic matrix. Like, one paper proposed that dog parts were oppressive manifestations of canine rape culture.
Yes, and another argued that straight men should be encouraged to engage in receptive anal penetration using sex toys as a therapeutic intervention to dismantle their toxic masculinity.
It's mathematically impossible to take that seriously. They deliberately removed all rational deduction and empirical data.
But they saturated the conclusions with extreme emotional validation and anti-male rhetoric, and the result validates Riker's darkest warnings.
Because these elite journals eagerly peer-reviewed and published them.
Exactly. Riker uses this to prove the institutional leftist literally no longer possesses the capacity for logical analysis. If the conclusion validates their emotional resentment toward the patriarchy, they ignore the mathematical impossibility of the premise.
So what happens if an individual tries to inject basic deductive logic back into that kind of environment? Riker points to the corporate sector for this, specifically James Damore at Google in 2017.
Right. Damore was a software engineer who wrote an internal memo about the company's diversity initiatives, but he didn't use emotional rhetoric.
He used mainstream evolutionary psychology and biological data. He suggested that the lack of a 50-50 gender split in high-stress coding jobs might just be due to innate biological differences in interests.
Men leaning toward systemizing, women toward empathizing. He was using the exact Aristotelian logic Riker champions.
And the Google HR bureaucracy reacted with sheer terror. They fired him for perpetuating harmful gender stereotypes.
Riker draws a massive historical parallel here. He equates firing Damore to the execution of Socrates in ancient Athens.
Wow. Socrates exposing the logical inconsistencies of the Athenian elite, so they forced him to drink hemlock.
Yeah, Riker argues the modern execution is just professional and social. The gynocentric elites use HR departments and social media to professionally execute any man who refuses to parrot their emotional realities.
Damore was a brilliant systems thinker, destroyed by fragile mediocrities, in Riker's view. But this brings up a massive paradox in his text.
What's that?
If this matrix is run by illogical, emotionally fragile actors, how does it even survive? Why doesn't it just collapse under its own incompetence?
Because, according to Riker, the Matrix is a parasite. It survives by feeding off the invisible labor of the very men it despises. He calls it gynocentric silence.
A coordinated refusal to acknowledge that modern infrastructure is entirely built and maintained by male sacrifice.
Exactly. He pulls from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Men account for over 92% of workplace fatalities. They dominate the lethal, essential jobs logging, deep-sea welding, high-voltage line maintenance.
Riker actually paints this mocking picture of modern activists chanting about toxic masculinity inside climate-controlled buildings, using electricity generated by men in coal mines, and walking on concrete poured by men who destroy their joints to do it.
The Matrix consumes male resources and logistical genius while offering nothing sustainable in return. It pathologizes the exact biology, the aggression, the strength that makes its comfortable existence possible.
That's intense. So if the culture is captured to this degree, it obviously shapes our laws.
Yeah.
How does a captured HR department translate into a captured courtroom?
Riker claims the legal battlefield is where the Matrix enforces its will through the weaponization of fragility. He looks at the legal system through classical logical fallacies.
Specifically the appeal to pity, right? Argumentum ad misericordiam.
Right. When logic fails them, leftists deploy pity as a shield. When pity fails, they escalate to weaponize resentment. And then they encode those demands into bureaucratic red tape.
Riker points back to the Roman origins of our legal system to show how bad this shift is. The Roman maxim that the burden of proof rests entirely on the accuser, never the defendant.
That principle, fused with Enlightenment rationalism, was designed so objective evidence would always triumph over mob hysteria.
But Riker says this has been deliberately inverted, effectively returning us to the Salem witch trials. He points right at the April 2011 Dear Colleague letter issued under the Obama administration.
He views that document as a catastrophic blow to due process. It pressured universities to create specialized tribunals for sexual misconduct under Title IX.
And the lethal part was altering the standard of proof to a preponderance of the evidence.
Exactly. Meaning a young man's future can be destroyed if a campus administrator decides there's just a 50.01% chance the accusation is true.
Riker argues this strips men of constitutional rights to face their accusers and demand proof beyond a reasonable doubt. It just prioritizes unverified feelings over objective truth.
And he claims this hostility extends straight into the family courts. He views modern family court as a tyrannical system designed to extract wealth from male competence to subsidize female autonomy.
He uses the 2023 divorce of Kevin Costner as his prime example of this. Costner is an apex high net worth male. Yet Riker argues the court just treated him as a disposable ATM.
The whole concept of no-fault divorce infuriates him. A woman can unilaterally shatter a legally binding contract without proving any wrongdoing, yet she's still legally shielded and heavily subsidized by the man she abandoned.
The state essentially becomes a massive bureaucratic surrogate husband, using the threat of police and prisons to forcefully extract wealth for the ex-wife's lifestyle.
Now, why does society tolerate this? Riker introduces an evolutionary biology concept here, neoteny.
Right, neoteny is when an adult organism retains juvenile physical features. Large eyes, round cheeks, softer facial structures.
And in humans, those features signal infancy and helplessness. They trigger our hardwired instinct to protect and provide.
Riker argues the female-coded left weaponizes neoteny as a cultural shield. They exploit the male instinct to protect infants, but apply it to fully grown, legally autonomous adult women.
His case study for this is the Johnny Depp and Amber Heard defamation trial. Long before any evidence was shown, the media and culture overwhelmingly decided Depp was guilty.
Because an accusation equals a conviction if the accuser projects enough neotenous fragility. You're socially forbidden from cross-examining a crying woman.
Exactly. Riker notes it took Depp dragging the spectacle into a structured patriarchal courtroom governed by strict rules of evidence to finally expose that Heard was the primary abuser.
It was a triumph of Aristotelian logic over weaponized pity. But the caveat is that 99% of men don't have Depp's massive wealth to endure years of litigation just to prove their innocence.
So how does the Matrix defend this double standard? Riker identifies a rhetorical strategy they use called the Motte-Bailey doctrine.
Oh, this is fascinating. The Motte-Bailey is a deceptive logical fallacy. It's when you conflate two distinct positions. The motte is the highly fortified keep of a castle. Easy to defend, but modest.
And the Bailey is the expansive, wealthy land outside the castle that you actually want to occupy, which is highly controversial and hard to defend.
Let's walk through Riker's hypothetical scenario of this. Imagine feminist ideologues occupying the Bailey. They are pushing extreme anti-male policies, strict hiring quotas excluding white men, dismantling due process, publishing papers saying masculinity is toxic.
They're aggressively expanding their territory, but the moment a rational man points out the mathematical absurdity of these policies, they instantly abandon the Bailey and retreat to the Motte.
They throw up their hands and say, whoa, why are you attacking us? We just believe in basic equality. Don't you believe women should have equal rights?
Exactly. They retreat to a sanitized, universally accepted definition. Riker calls this extreme rhetorical cowardice.
Because if you concede the Motte, if you say, yes, equality is good, they claim victory, march right back into the Bailey, and keep passing laws that disenfranchise men.
They use the unassailable concept of equality to shield female-coded supremacy.
It's wild. Okay, so we have the biological baseline, the institutional takeover, the legal inversion. But in the final sections, Riker elevates his argument into something vastly more profound. He calls it a literal spiritual inversion.
Yeah, he says viewing this as just a political dispute over HR guidelines totally misses the stakes. He claims the left harbors a metaphysical hatred for the logos.
The logos, the rational, divine, mathematical ordering principle of the universe in ancient theology.
Right. He asserts the modern left wants to obliterate the unyielding truth of the Heavenly Father and replace it with the emotionally hysterical, coddling tyranny of the bureaucratic mother state.
He maps this straight onto St. Augustine's City of God. Augustine said the ultimate human failing was superbia, this demonic, arrogant pride to usurp God's natural order.
Riker applies superbia directly to modern feminism. He says the lust for total egalitarianism isn't noble progress. It's the modern manifestation of original sin, a demonic desire to destroy God-given male authority.
To ground this spiritually, he points to two massive historical summits. The first is the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD.
Where early church leaders established Orthodox Christian theology. But Riker focuses on the mechanics. He describes it as a gathering of uncompromising, highly intellectual male minds.
They fused Greek syllogistic logic with Roman structural governance, creating an ironclad moral legalism.
Right. It wasn't about how people felt about God, it was about objective structural truth. And he contrasts this with the Synod of Whitby in 664 AD.
Where religious leaders in Britain had to choose between strict patriarchal Roman authority or the softer, decentralized feminine traditions of the Celtic Church.
They chose Rome. Rager says this proved a civilizational law. Universal truth requires a rigid, centralized, patriarchal enforcer to survive.
But his contemporary argument is that modern religious institutions completely forgot Nicaea and Whitby. They abandoned masculine logic to appease female-coded emotions.
He points directly to the Episcopal Church in the U.S. as his proof. In 1976, they started ordaining women.
Riker views that as a capitulation to second-wave feminism, and he claims the statistical fallout was immediate.
Church attendance plummeted. Theological literacy evaporated. By prioritizing emotional coddling over objective salvation, the church committed spiritual suicide.
He contrasts this decay in the West with a really paradoxical historical example, the Soviet Union's Family Code of 1936.
Oh, this part is fascinating. So in the 1920s, the early Soviet state tried this radical Marxist feminist experiment. Figures like Alexandra Kollontai pushed the glass of water theory that satisfying sexual desire should be as casual as drinking water.
They tried to dismantle the patriarchal family entirely, calling it a capitalist tool. Easy divorce, abortion on demand, encouraging women to prioritize state labor over raising kids.
And Riker details the catastrophic fallout. It didn't create a utopia. It caused a massive spike in juvenile delinquency, rampant poverty among abandoned mothers, and a terrifying drop in the birth rate.
The societal collapse was so bad that Joseph Stalin, a totalitarian dictator who only cared about industrial power, was forced to completely reverse course.
Stalin instituted the Family Code of 1936, heavily restricting divorce, banning abortion, and launching propaganda to glorify the traditional patriarchal family.
The irony is profound. Stalin had to forcefully resurrect the patriarchy just to save his communist utopia from demographic collapse.
Riker uses that as absolute proof that leftism inherently destroys the family and eventually requires totalitarian force to clean up its own wreckage.
But I have to pause here. We need to introduce some genuine friction into his model, because there is a massive paradox sitting right at the center of his thesis.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
Riker spends the whole book arguing that patriarchy is this divine, biologically hardwired, structurally superior design. Men are fiercely logical and competent. If that's true, how did this unyielding fortress succumb so quickly and comprehensively to a subjective, illogical, bureaucratic mother state?
Right. If Aristotelian logic is the ultimate truth, how did it lose the culture war to an HR department?
Exactly.
Well, Riker's explanation is that the patriarchal order wasn't defeated by logic. It was subverted through the weaponization of its own virtues.
The weaponization of virtues. How does he explain that?
He argues that the inherent strengths of the patriarchy, the male instinct to protect the weak, Christian charity, Enlightenment tolerance, were hacked.
So the left bypassed their logical defenses and just appealed directly to their protective instincts.
Yes, they used the appeal to compassion to justify subsidizing irresponsibility. They convinced men that enforcing strict standards was cruel. So the patriarchy didn't collapse because it was weak. It collapsed because it was too tolerant and forgiving of pathogens that exploited its desire to protect.
That is a staggering diagnosis. Okay, so we've covered the biology, the institutional takeover, the legal inversion, the spiritual decay. The patient is terminal, which brings us to the final section, the iron verdict. Escaping the matrix. What is his actionable prescription?
To frame his solution, Riker uses Albert O. Hirschman's 1970 theoretical model of exit, voice, and loyalty. These are the three responses to a declining organization.
Well, loyalty is obviously off the table for Riker, submitting his intellectual suicide. So he looks at voice, which means trying to fix the system from within. Debating, writing memos.
But Riker argues voice is utterly useless now. You cannot use logic to debate an ideologically possessed NPC. The Matrix only values compliance, not truth.
So if a man tries to use voice, they just use ad hominem attacks to destroy his character.
Or red herrings to change the subject and rhetorical bullying to force submission through the terror of social ostracization.
Which leaves only one viable solution. Exit. Total intellectual emigration and resource withdrawal. Riker commands his readers to enter monk mode.
Monk mode is the absolute withdrawal of a man's time, money, labor, and emotional attention from a rigged system, severing ties with the matrix and the corrupted sexual marketplace.
In daily life, this means refusing to engage in casual corporate team building or diversity seminars because they are just female-coded compliance checks. It requires total frame control.
Men must become the sovereign CEOs of their own existence. Stop apologizing for your biology or the achievements of male ancestors.
And a big part of that is the information diet, purging all leftist media and social media algorithms designed to induce outrage, anchoring your philosophy entirely in classical texts.
Tactically, he gets very specific about financial self-defense. He explicitly advises men to use decentralized crypto to insulate wealth from predatory taxation and the family courts.
Offshore trusts, complex legal entities. And relationally, his advice is brutal. Avoid state-sanctioned marriage licenses entirely. Why sign a contract with a state entity incentivized to ruin you?
If you must partner, use ironclad prenups and never ever submit to couples counseling.
Right, because he views the modern therapy industry as a female-coded apparatus that pathologizes male stoicism as avoidant attachment. He sees couples counseling as state-sponsored re-education to break down male logic.
It's an uncompromising, bleak view. But he also focuses heavily on physical fortification. He stresses the absolute imperative of heavy resistance training.
And not for vanity. He anchors it in neurobiology, specifically the science of myokines.
Yes, myokines are specialized proteins released by skeletal muscles during intense contraction. They cross the blood-brain barrier to actively combat depression and build neural resilience.
So by lifting weights, you are literally chemically fortifying your brain against the psychological warfare of the HR matrix. Physical strength anchors you to objective reality.
But he knows not every man can just quit his corporate job tomorrow. So for surviving inside the matrix while preparing to exit, he advises the Socratic break.
Oh, the Socratic break. So imagine you're trapped in a mandatory corporate diversity meeting, surrounded by the matrix. The facilitator is making emotional claims about systemic oppression.
Instead of arguing your feelings, you execute the Socratic break. You meticulously document every logical fallacy and emotional appeal. You adopt the persona of a detached logic machine.
You raise your hand and calmly demand they state the mathematical axioms of their worldview. Can you empirically define the precise metric by which systemic bias is eradicated?
Right. You force them to explain their terms using objective data. Riker asserts that because their worldview has no structural integrity, it will immediately shatter when forced to explain itself through Aristotelian reason.
It's a method of psychological survival, maintaining your grip on reality while surrounded by madness. Well, we have covered a monumental amount of intellectual territory today.
We really have. We unpacked his entire framework, how objective logic and patriarchal authority were taken over by a bureaucratic matrix, the weaponization of fragility, the spiritual inversion, and the mandate for monk mode.
It's a sweeping, unapologetic worldview that demands adherence to biological determinism and logic, completely rejecting modern egalitarian consensus. Which leaves us with a final thought for you, the listener, to ponder today.
Let's extrapolate Riker's prescription to its absolute endgame. Imagine society actually reaches the point he advocates.
Competent men entirely withdraw their resources, labor, and emotional investment into insulated, male-only monk mode fortresses. And women retreat entirely into their own state-subsidized ideological spheres.
If this total bifurcation happens, what happens to the fundamental human project of collaboration?
Can any civilization actually endure if men and women cease to view each other as vital partners and instead view each other purely as hostile, irreconcilable political operatives in a zero-sum war?
It's a chilling question to mull over as you digest everything we've unpacked today.
If you want to dive deeper into the author's mind, you should follow him at Conrad Tracer on Bivstack. And reminding you once more, check Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks to buy the book Logic Over Leftism. Finally, please like and subscribe to the show so you never miss our deep dives into the most complex source material out there. Keep questioning, keep analyzing, and keep diving deep.